If the wind is blowing directly in your face, you cannot move forward. This sounds like an absolute truth, almost a law of nature. We see it every day. Smoke is carried downwind, leaves fly where the airflow pushes them. Everything follows one simple rule: the wind sets the direction. But then a question arises, one that breaks this logic. Why have sailboats been able to move toward where the wind is coming from for hundreds of years? What allows them to confidently move forward, cross oceans, and reach their destination? It looks like a contradiction, but in fact, it is one of the most beautiful examples of how humanity learned not to fight nature, but to use it more deeply than meets the eye. Imagine the simplest scenario. You throw a ball into a strong wind. What happens? It gets carried backward. You hold up a piece of fabric. The wind pushes against it, driving it in the opposite direction. This is perfectly logical. Air moves. It pushes everything in its path. Now imagine a boat with a sail. Intuitively, it seems that it should behave the same way. The wind blows from behind. The boat moves forward. The wind blows from the front. The boat stops or drifts backward. That's how we expect things to work. But in reality, something strange happens. The boat doesn't just stop, it begins to move forward, despite the oncoming airflow. This means our basic understanding is incomplete. The first sails in history were extremely simple. Large square sheets of fabric attached to a mast. Their purpose was obvious: catch the wind and use it as a push. Such sails worked perfectly when the wind came from behind. The ship was literally pushed forward by the airflow. But as soon as the wind changed direction, everything changed. If the destination lay upwind, sailors had almost no options. Either row manually, wait, or change course. The wind literally dictated the rules. It decided when you sailed, where you sailed, and whether you sailed at all. Trade, travel, war. Everything depended on the whims of the air. The world was limited not by distances, but by the direction of the wind. But at some point, people realized you don't have to catch the wind directly. You can interact with it at an angle. Thus, a new type of sail appeared. Triangular, movable, able to change its position relative to the wind. And this changed everything. Instead of waiting for the wind to blow in the right direction, the sailor began to choose the angle at which it meets the airflow. This sounds like a small change, but in practice, it was a revolution. Ships became less dependent. Routes that were previously impossible emerged. Oceans ceased to be a barrier. For the first time, humans began not to obey the wind, but to work with it. To understand what happens next, we need to completely change our view of the sail. It is not a bag that catches air. It works entirely differently. A sail is essentially an airplane wing, only positioned vertically. When an airplane flies, its wing does not simply push off the air. It creates a pressure difference. On one side, air flows faster, on the other, slower. The result is a force that lifts the airplane upward. The same thing happens with a sail. When it is stretched and correctly oriented relative to the wind, it stops simply receiving the impact of air. It begins to shape the flow around itself. And at that moment, something appears that makes upwind movement possible. When the wind meets the sail, the airflow splits. One part passes on one side, the other on the opposite side. Due to the shape and angle of the sail, the air moves differently. On one side, the flow accelerates. On the other, it slows down. Where speed is higher, pressure is lower. Where speed is lower, pressure is higher. The result is a pressure difference, and this difference creates a force. But here is the key point that is often missed. This force is not directed forward. It is directed at an angle, sideways. This is where the main secret of the entire system lies. It is counterintuitive. It seems that if the boat moves forward, the force should also be directed forward. But in reality, it is more complex. The sail creates what is called lift, just like a wing. And this lift is always directed roughly perpendicular to the airflow. That is, if the wind is coming from ahead at an angle, the sail will pull the boat sideways, almost across its direction of travel. This raises a logical question. If all the force goes sideways, why doesn't the boat go sideways as well? Imagine a boat with no underwater part. Then everything becomes obvious. The wind pulls the sail sideways, and the boat begins to slide sideways. It doesn't move toward its goal, it simply drifts. This is called leeway. If the boat had no mechanism to resist this, upwind movement would be impossible. The boat would behave like a piece of wood on the water. It would simply be carried where the airflow wants. So we return to the original problem. The wind dictates the direction. To solve this, a second element of the system is needed, and it is hidden underwater. Beneath the surface, a sailboat has a part often underestimated: the keel. The keel is not just ballast or weight. It is an active element that works much like the sail, but in water. The keel is a long, rigid blade extending downward. When the boat tries to move sideways, the keel interacts with the water. Water is a very different medium. It is about 1,000 times denser than air, which means it resists motion much more strongly. When the keel moves through water at an angle, it creates its own lift, but in the water. And this force is directed opposite to the leeway. In simple terms, the wind pulls the boat sideways. The keel grips the water and prevents that sideways motion. And here the system begins to work. Now we have two forces. One pulls the boat sideways, the sail. The other blocks this motion, the keel. What happens when sideways movement becomes impossible? The energy does not disappear, it gets redirected. And the only direction left free is forward. This is the key point of the entire mechanics. The boat moves forward not because it is being pushed. It moves forward because it is not allowed to move sideways. It is like squeezing an object between two surfaces at an angle. It slips out in the only available direction. The sail and keel work as a single system. Air creates the force. Water imposes constraints. Together, they convert sideways force into forward motion. And that is exactly why a boat can sail against the wind. But even this system has a limit. If you point the boat directly into the wind, everything stops working. The airflow no longer flows smoothly around the sail. It separates, loses its shape, begins to oscillate chaotically. The sail stops creating a pressure difference, and thus the force disappears. At that moment, the boat loses motion. There is a so-called no-sail zone, an angle directly into the wind where movement is impossible. Typically, this is about 30 to 45 degrees on either side of the wind direction. Inside this zone, the sail does not work, the flow is unstable, and motion ceases. That is, you still cannot completely ignore the wind, but you can go around it. And here appears one of the most elegant ideas in navigation: tacking. If you cannot go straight forward, you can go at an angle, then change the angle and repeat. The boat does not move in a straight line, but in a zigzag. First at an angle to the right of the wind, then a turn, then at an angle to the left. Each leg gives a small forward advance, and the sum results in movement toward a destination that is directly upwind. This requires precision, calculation, and constant control. But it is this technique that allowed humans to cross oceans, despite the limitations of nature. And here another interesting effect emerges. When the boat starts moving, it creates its own airflow. The result is what is called apparent wind, a combination of the true wind and the wind generated by the boat's motion. Here is the paradox. The faster the boat moves, the more it feels like the wind is blowing directly into its face. This requires constant sail adjustment. The angle that worked a second ago may already be inefficient. Therefore, sail control is not a one-time action, but a continuous process. You are constantly balancing between wind direction, speed, and sail position. And it is in this balance that motion is born. The story of sailing against the wind is not just a story about ships. It is a story about how humans learn to think differently and to bypass natural obstacles. When we face an obstacle, our first reaction is to push harder, to break through, to fight, to force our way. But the sail teaches us something else. It shows that sometimes strength lies not in overcoming resistance, but in understanding it and making it work for you.